Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jim Cairns. I recognize some of you here from our previous lectures. Tonight is the final lecture in a 4-lecture series on innovation and invention, and I'm pleased that it's the last lecture, but I'm pleased also very much to be here with you. I want to begin by thanking Embry-Riddle University for hosting this series. They've been very gracious to give us the auditorium and set things up. Well, we've had, as I say, 3 previous lectures, and I'm going to go through part of the route from initial idea to final cashing in on inventions. Please come in. For those of you who weren't here before, I described the route from getting an idea up here at number 1 on the roadmap, through a dangerous route and filled with many difficult portions down here to where you finally cash in on the invention. So just to run through it quickly, up here at number 1, we started out by trying to identify some problems that could be solved, and you make a list of those. You finally choose one from the list, and when you have done that, to go forward with that gets you through gate 3. There's a segment of the route here where you mature the invention as far as you can in your mind's eye. And in the second lecture, last week's lecture, we went through this portion of it to talk about mind's eye visualization and went through some exercises. How many of you were here last week? Could I see? How many of you tried to do the exercises after we had the class? You have to get busy. Anyhow, we did that. This is where you mature the design. When you've gone as far as you can in your own mind's eye with a design, then there's a path segment here where you vet that invention to look at its marketability, manufacturability, and so on, to be sure you have what I call a fundamentally good idea. That means it's something that has some good promise of commercial potential. Then we went through this segment here, which is a learning experience about intellectual property. And this was in the second lecture. And it's all about the different sorts of patents, how to just get a fundamental working knowledge of the system for describing your patent material, for defining its ownership, and for protecting it. Then there come various ways here that you can get down to point 15, which is where you have your filed patent. You could go to a patent professional. You could do as we did in that lecture and go down here and learn how to do patent searches online and learn how to do a sort of a layman's infringement analysis of the patents. Having done that, you can go back to the professional patent agent or attorney and have your patent filed by them. Or you could go down here through Route 13 to 15 and do it yourself once you're armed with that information. Or starting up here, you could simply go down there by yourself through Path 9 and file it, which is, as I've said before, is not recommended at all. So this in the first lecture we covered the whole thing. In the second lecture we covered this part of it. Last week's lecture covered the first part of it. And tonight we're going to look at the part of the path beyond gate 15, beyond where you have your patent filed, and look and see what you do next. This is, sometimes I've described this route as being divided into 3 sorts of parts. One part is technical, which is where you're maturing your invention, and it gets technical again down here, as we'll see. Some parts are commercial, which when you get into contractual dealings and things is down in here, and some parts of it are legal. So we're going to go into what is mostly a commercial area tonight. So in the last lecture, there was a couple here who had been fleeced by these little characters down at 16 on the road map. And I wanted to just, because this is the second story I've heard in the last few months of people who've been taken, I thought I would just take a minute or two this evening to address this part. Once your patent is published, the application is published, you get publicity from all over the United States of people who want to search the patent for you, or do infringement analysis for you. They want to market the patent for you. They want to develop it for you. They are all scoundrels, in my opinion, and they're there to take your money. And typically they'll nick you for about $20,000 before you realize that you're being ripped off. They're a real problem in our business. So I wanted to say to you a way you can protect yourself a little bit tonight. And that's to go back to this website here, the uspto.gov. Click on the independent inventors icon, and that'll open up this window here. This is just a segment of the window that opens. And go to click on scam prevention. Now, it's not going to save you, but what it does is give you a list of all the complaints that people have made on these various marketing companies. You'll see yours on there probably. And it gives you an opportunity to file a complaint, which will appear on there and possibly help somebody else. So that's one thing to help protect yourself. Another thing you can do, and I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but I wanted to just put this up too. There are some benign resources available to you, and they're not as slick as the publicity you've been getting through the mail for these other guys. But if you go to this website here, this greenbiz.com, it leads you to a number of things, but enter this term here into their search page, inventor assistance. And that will lead you to a window where you can get a free download of this Inventor Assistance Source Directory, the 6th edition. That's published by the Department of Energy, and it gives a lot of resources which are nonprofit. It'll also lead you to things like your local inventors clubs and resources like that that are very useful, and they're not going to try to screw you. One problem with it is that it's a little bit out of date. It was published in 2001, I believe, but it's still very, very useful. So I've just stuck that in a lecture tonight for some of you who have been done business with the folks who are down there at, sorry. No, I'm going, what am I doing? Yeah. Who were down here at 16. I keep trying to use the slide changer as a pointer. It doesn't work very well. Okay, we'll get into the meat of tonight's lecture, which is the ways to cash in on your intellectual property. And once again, I start with a side trip that you would have to make first time you go through this journey, and that is to learn something about these various ways to do it. There are basically three ways. The first one is to assign the rights to your patent. And you remember we said some time ago in an early lecture that you can make a good analogy between intellectual property and real property, where the patent is a deed to your intellectual property, and the claims of the patent delineate the boundaries of your property. So if you think of assigning in terms of real property, It's the same as selling your intellectual property. So you sell out. You can sell out either fully or partially, and I'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of these two routes. Or you can license your patent, which is the equivalent of leasing your real property. And you can lease it to one entity only, which would be an exclusive license, or you can license it to more than one entity, which would be non-exclusive licenses that you would give to each of them. And the last and most difficult way to cash in is to start an invention-based business. And I equate this to putting a farm on your intellectual property and growing your crops and selling them. But it's the most difficult of all. In the last lecture, I told you about some of my own personal experiences and described a very basic sort of technology that I developed back in the 60s. And it was a method for connecting electrical circuits underwater, plug-in socket connectors that you could put in and unplug and plug underwater. And I promised you this evening I was going to tell you how I cashed in on my initial intellectual property. So this was back in the 60s. Prior to that time, I had had several inventions, one of them even on an underwater connector, which I did not pursue to patent. But I patented the first one in the late 60s, and I didn't have any money to do much of anything with it, so I licensed that patent out. I licensed it to a company who diligently tried to produce it and market it, but they weren't able to do so. In my subsequent patents, I also licensed them. And each time I took, I'll explain to you a little bit later in the lecture, but what is called the minimum annual royalty on it. So when you license it to a company, they promise to pay you some royalties. I never had any luck with licensing, to tell you the truth, except that I licensed the same patents over and over again. And each time, keep in mind this is early 70s money, I was getting about $10,000 a whack for licensing it. So nobody ever produced it, but I made money. And I saved that money and invested it in real estate. And by 1980, I had about $250,000 put away, which doesn't sound like much, but in 1980s dollars, that was a fair chunk of change. And I had enough money to take a few years off and start a business, my own business. And I did that, and that was a great success. And I then sold the business to Lockheed Corporation. I liked that method of cashing in. So shortly after, with Mike Volmar, who's here this evening, and some others, started another business called Ocean Design, which is here in Daytona Beach, and which sold to Teledyne Corporation in 2009. So I have done everything on this list more than once. And I probably made most of the mistakes that a human being can make doing this. And that's what I want to share with you. So I want to talk about these one by one now. So as I mentioned, assignment is equivalent to the sale of your intellectual property. You may not have a choice if you're employed by someone to do certain things. And in your employment contract, you may have a covenant that says that anything that you invent in the business sector of your company is automatically assigned to them. So, you know, you're not going to make any money on that. You might get a nice pat on the back or plaque for your wall. But that's one thing that you might have done, maybe even inadvertently. But if you still own the rights yourself, Then if you assign them to somebody, it gives you an early payday, because you sell it, you get paid, take your money, and usually there are no lingering responsibilities, with the possible exception that if your invention is one that requires further development, then whoever buys that patent from you may offer you an employment agreement to help them develop it. And they would be kind of nuts not to do that if it has a lot of technical development left to do. But if you do that, you should have a contract that really pays you for the services that you give them, pays you well, because you're the expert at your own invention, and nobody else is going to know better than you how to continue its development. So that's full assignment. Now there's partial assignment, where you can sell somebody or barter for services for somebody to have them own a share of your patent. I recommend that you don't do that. It is done, and you can do it, obviously, but it's better, I think, to assign a profit share of the revenues generated by the invention with them. And the reason for that is that any part owner in a United States patent has the full rights to exercise the patent. So if you sell somebody 1% ownership, they can go out and relicense it, do whatever, it depends on your contract, but basically they have as much right as you do to exercise the patent. That's probably not what you had in mind, and you can avoid that contractually. So it's a trap that you should not fall into. So that's all I'm going to say about assignment. And I'm going to go on and say a whole lot more about licensing, because an assignment is fairly clean. You sell it, it's gone. If you have some lingering employment agreement, maybe, but other than that, it's over with. Licensing is difficult. And the first topic up here is finding a licensee. What I'm going to cover here could apply equally well to finding an acquirer if you were going to assign your invention to somebody. So before you go into this, you have to have at a minimum a patent pending, which means that you must have at least a provisional patent application on file. Otherwise, you stand a great risk of exposing your technology to other people. And particularly now, as I've mentioned in the other lectures, with the changes that are coming about this month in the patent regulations, which means that whereas it used to be the first one to invent something could get a patent, now it's the first one who gets to the patent office that can have the patent. So you don't want to go spreading the word about your stuff around too generally until you have some protection. Now, if you're going to be looking for a licensee, the first thing you need to do is to research the commercial field of your invention. Find out who the players are. Look for ones that you might like to do business with, because there's some of them out there you won't want to have anything to do with. Others might be compatible partners. So look hard to see who's out there and what they're doing. And one of the ways you can do this is through the patent search routines that we talked about earlier. But another way, which is much more straightforward, is just to go to the literature in that field and see who's advertising and see what they're selling and see if your product fits into their product line well. Now, I say to rank, if you've got a short list of companies that you would like to approach to take a license on your stuff, make a list and rank them according to which would be your most favorite, next most favorite, least favorite. And when you make contact with them, start with the least favorite, because you're going to have flaws in the first time you go in and present your product to a potential licensee. Your presentation might not be as slick as it would be when you get around to the last one you present it to. So work out your kinks in your presentation on your least favorite. And talk to them all, obviously, before you do anything. The other thing I would say is go to industry trade shows and take a prototype or whatever demonstrative material you have about your invention, take it to the trade shows in that industry and go around to the booths of the companies that you've targeted as potential licensees. And what I say to make contact with these companies, the best contact you can get is with their marketing manager. Don't go to the engineering manager because he's going to be upset that his engineers didn't invent that, and they won't want to look at your invention. The marketing manager has no responsibility other than to make money for the company, and he doesn't care where it comes from. So that's your contact. And faulting that, you could go with the CFO, because also the CFO has no engineering axe to grind. He'll be unbiased. The other thing is to use mailing lists or emailing lists to find out who these people are and maybe eventually try to interest them in your product. The mailing lists are more useful for searching for acquirers than they are licensees, but they work. They work. The trade show thing has always been my favorite, because at the trade show you have the company's executives, usually some of them are there, and they're much more accessible there than they would be if you tried to make an appointment in their office. Okay, license agreements can obviously be like a lease agreement on your real property, can be whatever the signatories agree to. They can be exclusive or non-exclusive, meaning that you can give them the worldwide exclusive rights to the one entity to manufacture and sell your products, or you can give it to several people. There are nuances to this, but if you have a technical product, particularly if it's going to take some time and effort to mature that product, other businesses will not want to take a non-exclusive license. They're not going to invest their money unless they can have the whole thing. So that's generally. Now, another thing to be aware of is that some big company might take a non-exclusive license, which you would say would be at a reduced fee compared to an exclusive one, only to put your product on the shelf. If you have a highly technical product, if a company takes a non-exclusive license on it, pays you a little bit of money, and you're thinking, okay, I can go license it to other people aren't going to touch it. If you have a new invention for a car, and General Motors, not that they would do this, but if they took a non-exclusive license just to keep it off the market, you know, Ford or Chrysler, they're not going to develop that because they can see that big other competitor there who could swoop in and take their market share away. So they can be industry-specific or general license agreements. I used an example in the earlier lectures of a little device that could be used to take twist-top caps off of bottles, and mentioned when you're defining that product that it could also be modified to take oil filters off of cars. So they have two separate industries. So you could license it to people that made auto tools for working on cars, and you can license it to another one who makes can openers. I would say when you look at these different ways for licensing, industry-specific or general, exclusive or non-exclusive, before you enter into such agreement, check with your tax attorney or your CPA, because there are slight differences in the way these various elements are taxed that could be important to you. So part of a license agreement then is the fees that you will get paid to let somebody else use your technology. And they come in a number of forms. The first thing usually happens when you go to license your products is that the licensee will want to have an option period to evaluate your technology and to evaluate your patent. So in that option period, they're going to be doing a number of things. Their engineers are going to be trying to figure out how to make the product without using the aspects of it that you have patented. And they're going to desperately want to show to their superiors how they can make it better. Their attorneys are going to be looking very carefully at your patent to make sure that it is truly defensible and strong and that they're licensing something that will give them protection. Their business people are going to be looking at it to see if they can make a solid business case for it. So all that's going to be going on during an option period. Option period typically would be 60 days, maybe 90 days. It really shouldn't be much longer than that. If they're serious about it, that should be all the time they need. So they'll pay you a fee to keep your technology off the market for that length of time. It's a negotiated fee, but keep in mind that your clock is ticking on your patent, and they're keeping you from talking to other people about it. So you just keep that in mind. And then if you decide to give them an option, by the way, the option should contain at minimum a term sheet for what the eventual license agreement elements will be. Because you give them an option, then you have to make a best effort on both parts to find an equitable, mutually beneficial license agreement. So try to get as much stuff in that option in your favor as you can. So they've got the option fee, whatever it is, you give them 60 or 90 days, and then they want to take a license, then there's a signing fee. The signing fee is usually equal to 1 year's minimum annual royalty, which I'll talk about next. You want the company who takes the license to be aggressively pursuing the manufacturing, development, and marketing of your product. And so what I recommend to do is to, first of all, gauge their enthusiasm and don't go in with your hat in your hand and say, I'm desperate to license this. Of course you will be, but don't let them know that. And so I would ask them at a certain point, they've had the option period, tell me what your sales are going to be of my product for the next 3 years. What do you estimate the sales to be? So let's say they tell you $1 million, just take a number out of the air. And you say, okay, suppose you're dealing with a royalty of about 3%. So say 3% of $1 million, $30,000. Say, okay, maybe I'll give you that you're off by 10% in your estimate, that you've overestimated what you can do, and I'm going to give you a break. I'm only going to ask you for $27,000 for the minimum annual royalty. They'll say, wait a minute, that's too much. I say, don't you have any faith in your business predictions? So you've got to work them a little bit like that. But I'll tell you, this is something you're not going to find in a textbook. But this is what you have to do if you want to strike a good deal for yourself. Then there will be a minimum annual royalty, and as I mentioned, when I licensed my first products, I took them all back because the company wasn't willing to pay, and that's paid in advance. That's paid at the beginning of the coming year. They guarantee you that much royalty. So they weren't able to really get the product on the market, and I took it back. I put that money in the bank and licensed it again and again and again. I licensed 5 times one thing and took it back every time on minimum annual royalties. So you want to set that high enough so that it's going to be painful for them to keep your product off the market. They can't, if you set it at $5,000 or something, they're just going to give you a $5,000 check at the beginning of each year and won't do anything if it's a competitive product for them. So set it high enough that it's going to cause them pain if they don't perform. Now, there will be possibly an advanced, if you don't have this fee, there'll be an advance payment on a minimum annual royalty. As I say, this is paid at the beginning of the coming year to you. Now, if you offer them technical support, then they have to pay you for that, obviously. And it's in your benefit to offer technical support to a licensee, because you want to get that product out in the best form that it can be on the market and to get the most sales, clearly. So you want to help them get that on the market, but you should be paid for it. And then your license agreement should contain some agreement in there on who gets rights to improvements of the invention. The licensor, you, should have improvements to anything that, any improvements on your invention, whether they're made by you or made by the licensee. That does two things. One is it keeps them from designing around you as time goes on. And the other thing is that it lengthens the time of your license agreement, because every time you file a new improvement patent or something, the clock starts ticking again on your 20-year lifetime of your protection. So this extends your income period. And then finally, and there are many, many more things that go into a license agreement. I'm just hitting the high spots here. But finally, you have to think about under what conditions the license agreement will terminate. I mentioned one, which is non-payment of royalties. But you know, there should be any breach of the license agreement that you have with them should trigger a termination of your opportunity to terminate. They will have opportunities to terminate too. Suppose that you didn't really own the patent, for instance, or it infringed on someone else's and they couldn't produce a product. They can terminate it. Finally, I will say a lot of people try to get all their money on these upfront fees. Don't do that. Be reasonable. And the real money is downstream on the royalties over the 20-year lifetime of your patent. So be reasonable on this. And in terms of royalties, what the royalty should be on a patent, it really is whatever you can negotiate. But typically, it's between a couple percent and 6%, something like that. It's rare that it's more than 6%. Also rare that it's less than 2, but less rare that it's less than 2. So that, oh my God, I'm way behind. I'm going to just go through this quickly. I'm being too long-winded here. So as I say, go in there, present yourself to your licensee as one of their equals. You keep in mind that you're going to be a partner with them if they take the license. You're going to be sitting at the same table with them, going through all of the business decisions. Keep in mind that they have only one goal in mind, and that's to make money without any hassles. And when you give the presentation to them, don't do as I'm doing tonight and talk too much. Tell them why you're there. Tell them why you've chosen them as a licensee. Explain the principal features of your invention. And if you have a prototype or something to show, take that to the meeting. Keep it on the side until you get their attention a little bit, because they're going to be looking over there wondering what the heck you really have. So after you're engaged in the discussion, then start passing your prototypes around. And target there'll be one person in that room who will be the one who would be saying yes or no on your license. Try to figure out who that is and target them. So how your features will set your product apart from others, why many customers will choose your product over others, the market segment your product will address, and how they are going to make money by licensing your technology. When you close that meeting, try to draw out some reaction, and in particular, try to set a date for a discussion of the license agreement itself. Now, you know, it's popular now, the Shark Tank idea of going in and giving a 30-minute or 30-second or whatever, 3-minute pitch. I think that's, I think it's a bunch of crap because it might work on television, but in the real world, if people are interested in what you have to sell, they're going to sit there and listen to you. And they're going to want to hear in a calm way what you have to say. So I mean, I've never had any trouble getting people to listen to me. You make an appointment, you go in, they give you your time, they give you their time, I mean, and take your time and give a full explanation to them. Okay, here's the one that's going to take some time to talk about, and that's starting your own invention-based business. And this is the third way that I mentioned to cash in, and the most difficult. So this is a lot more challenging, say, than opening a pizza shop or a dry cleaner or something where you already have a product or a service ready to sell people. Here you have nothing more tangible than an idea when you're starting out. I've got this good idea. And now you have to do everything that it takes, I mean, everything, to find a place, rent a place, start building your team, doing everything else. And it's a long haul. So you see many pizza shops or whatever, they fail, or dry cleaners fail. And so the probability of making it on an invention-based business is even smaller than that. So I recommend, first of all, you start with a good business plan. If you need to have a written down business plan. And you know, if you can't write down what you're going to do, then you don't know what you're going to do. And if you don't know what you're going to do, you're in trouble before you even start. So put down a business plan. And even if you think you know how to do a business plan and you're happy with it, go get help. Go to one of the local facilities that I mentioned before, a small business development center. If you're in the incubator, go to the people in the incubator center. Go to anybody of the services that I mentioned, free services that I mentioned earlier, and get them to help you. So when you start your company, and part of your business plan should be your exit strategy. What do you want to do with this business? Do you want to leave it to your kids? Do you want to work in it the rest of your life? Do you want to sell it as soon as you can and run away with the money, which is the option I like? Or what is it you want to do? Because if you don't have that plan in mind, then you're not going to achieve it in the way that you should. That's the imagination thing that we talked about last week. Imagine how this is going to turn out for you and work toward that. You need to have enough funds lined up to float the business for 4 to 5 years. They don't have to be your life savings. Keep aside enough so that if you fail, you can start over again. And here's where family and friends money comes in very handy. But you need to be able to dedicate yourself to that invention-based business for about that long before you have a prayer of getting any money coming back in. I'd say find a business site very close to your home. Could be your garage. But find a business site close to your home because you're going to be there day and night. And you don't want to have to drive a half an hour to get there. You'll be there every time there's something goes wrong or something pops into your mind that you need to do. During this few years period of getting stabilized, I would say that your emotions go in a pendulum between euphoria and sheer terror and everything in between. It's a roller coaster ride, and you better hang on tight and be ready for it. And finally, you cannot overestimate the amount of physical and mental stamina that it takes to start up a company like this. it will draw everything from you, and your family will suffer as well along with you. But don't underestimate the effort that it's going to take to make that go. Okay, the next thing you need to do is to start building a team for your new company. And I say, for at least in my activities, I've always started out by myself. But envision what your team's going to be like at a 10-person level as you start up. And then hire to that 10-person level in the order of urgency. Don't hire before you need people. Don't wait too long to hire them. But try to bring the right people in at the right time. And you don't know what the right person's going to be. I mean, it might be a janitor. It doesn't matter. You have to add those people that free your time and can support you in doing what you need to do. Interview your candidates thoroughly. This means a background check. There are businesses that do background checks. They range from around $100 or so if somebody just does an internet dump on somebody, or up to a few $100s, but they're worthwhile. We have had occasions where we hired an accountant once in our financial group, and it turned out he had embezzled $20,000 or $30,000 from us before we realized it, and we caught him. And in questioning, we said, "Why did you do this?" Well, it turns out he was out on bail awaiting sentencing for embezzling. And he said he wanted to spend some quality time with his children before he went to jail. So he embezzled from us. So it wouldn't have taken much to find that out if we had done the minimum of checking. Check educational credentials and verify original transcripts. We frequently turn up people who lied on their transcripts. And my favorite one was one who came in and said he was fluent in both Italian and Portuguese. We were interviewing him as CEO. Well, I speak Italian. So about halfway into the interview, I said, "Now let's do the interview in Italian." He couldn't come up with a sentence. I said, "Okay." We continued on with the interview, and we walked out of my office, and we had a Portuguese speaking lady from Brazil who worked for us. And I said, "Oh, Maria, this man speaks Portuguese. Would you like to have a conversation with him?" Couldn't come up with a word. And we have a number of stories like that. But check them out. Verify their experience. Check their past employers. And I'll create a simple test relevant to the position. If you're hiring an electrical engineer, one of our questions was draw the wiring diagram for a flashlight. They couldn't do it. Some people couldn't do it. Tell us what's Ohms Law. He said, Ohms Law means you turn the breaker off before you work on your circuits in your house. Some of you don't know what Ohms Law is, but that's not what it is. And then I create a simple test with those kinds of questions, and then to ask them to write a 100-word paragraph on the spot on a subject of your choice. Well, it could be like, why do you think you're qualified for this job? But that's a really good test. Ask people to sit down and write something out if you find out a lot about a person like that. Finally, demand a drug-free workplace. Do testing. Avoid hiring people with history of illegal drug use. That'll be part of your background check. And finally, I am very reluctant, have been, to hire multiple members of the same family, particularly in a very small company. I mean, you have to deal with enough people without them going home at night and teaming up on you. So avoid that. Okay, I'm really running behind, but I hope you don't mind. So this is another thing about starting an invention-based business. One of the things you might decide to do is partner with somebody. So you have to ask yourself, do you want a working partner or simply a financial partner? A financial partner is easier. If it's a working partner, you need to understand what your respective duties are. What's your duty? What's his duty or her duty? And you see what happens if one of you doesn't perform your duties, either voluntarily or through some incapacitation. You have to decide up front how the revenues, expenses, and liabilities will be divided. And how will the decision process take place? Who has the ultimate overall authority? It better be you if you're the one going out to look for a partner. But it better be understood that you have across-the-board authority and not just in every area except your partners. And finally, what rights will the partners have to sell their interests? Will there be rights of first refusal? Will there be successor rights? Do you want your partner's heirs as your partners? Maybe not. So you should get all of this and any other issues in writing, in a contract, before you go into a partnership. It's very important. You know, I say it's like a marriage. It can all be rosy when you start, but that partner can turn out to be your bitter enemy in the end. So be careful. Be careful means having everything legally set down in writing. Growing pains. Well, the core team members who launched the company might not be the same ones to take it beyond a certain higher level. It takes exceptional skills to start a company. I mean, it really does take unique individuals to start a company. And they have to have some real skills in a lot of different areas. But it may turn out, as it did in my own case, that the company outgrew my abilities to do certain management chores that I had to do. So I had to try to recognize that. I had a lot of help from my board members recognizing that. But it's essential that you keep an eye on that. And don't let your ego keep you from getting someone to help you. And I would say to assign titles very reluctantly at the first. When you're 3 or 4 people, you know, you shouldn't be, one should be, say, I'm going to be the CEO. Why don't you be the president and you'll be the vice president in charge of everything? You don't need those titles. And you don't have enough of a structure yet to decide where those titles should go. So it's something to do reluctantly. Finally, the thing that you really strive for is a huge success, immediate success. That can sink you as quickly as anything else I can think of, because funding growth is very difficult. It's, you know, you get an order and you use your funds to fill the order and you ship the order, and you're going to get paid, if you're lucky, maybe 60 or 90 days down the road. In the meantime, while you spent your money and you're processing that order, you get another big order. Now, how do you fund that? And you get another one before you get any money coming back, and how do you fund that? So it's, if you don't, you know, I say, you know, we almost lost our last company because of this rapid success, and we weren't able to really adjust to it as quickly as we should have. And finally, as you try to get this outside money to fund your growth, be very careful of signing personal guarantees, because you, as one of the principals in the company, will sign a personal guarantee, possibly. Well, your whole company, all of your associates are going to benefit from your having signed that. But when things go badly, you're the one left holding the sack. So I have never signed personal guarantees, and Mike knows we had to go to some strange places to get our money from time to time, but we always got it. There was a certain character named Vito from the garment district in New York who funded some of our operations for a while. Well, I just had another thing to say there. Growing pains are painful, but in fact it means that you're growing, which is what you want to do. So I've said how to cash in, and I've got 4 minutes to say when to cash in, so I'm going to try to do that very quickly. The first reasonable place to cash in is down here at number 18 on the map. And it's when you have a patent filed, and if your device merits it, to have some prototypes made, something you can show somebody. Now, up to this point, you don't really have much to sell. And even if you sell at this point, you don't have very much to sell. An undeveloped patent has very limited value. But if you need to sell it and or license it out and get on with your life, do it and get it over with. But I recommend going just one more step here to point 20 on the map and do some proof of concept tests. They're very simple. You have certain concepts that are necessary for your device to function. I used the example of a teapot in an earlier lecture, and an opening lid with a whistle in it for a teapot. As you don't have to build a teapot to see if that lid is going to whistle. You have to just build a whistle, and you don't have to build a teapot and see how much pressure it takes to blow it up to know at what point that whistle needs to relieve the pressure. So just do things here. This is if your invention allows it, try to do some simple proof of concept tests. Try to do them yourself if you can. If you can't do them yourself, try to be intimately involved with them, because it's a great learning experience. This is where you really learn to see ways to improve your product. This is probably an okay place to sell or license, it hasn't cost you much to do this step. But if you're not planning to go ahead with finding your own business, this is probably the point where you should license or assign your interests. If you want to keep on your own with your growing business, the next thing you have to do here in 22 is to define your product. You define whether it's going to be used to take caps off of bottles or oil filters out of cars, and what your marketplace is. And you need to do that before you know exactly what it is that you're going to build. And then once you've done that, that's not very expensive, but it takes a whole lot of work. Once you've done that, you go to an expensive thing, which is at 24. And that's to do the qualification tests that qualify your product to that marketplace. Those tests can be very expensive. A lot of them are destructive. A lot of them take long periods of time. Excuse me. And so that's not something to go into lightly. But if you're into that and you finish your chores at point 24, that opens gate 25, and now you get your product onto the market and you begin your ongoing business. So I said you should make your exit plan before you start, and the exit plan will say what to do. You're down here at 26. Now what do you do with your company? Well, I want to explain this chart to you a little bit. The horizontal axis on this is time. The vertical axis is activity. The activity could be most any activity that typifies how your business is going. Could be your expenses, your financial returns, your profits, anything like that. But you're going to find that they all go through a cycle that looks something like this. It could be also the growth of your technology in particular. It goes through an embryonic stage, and that is starting back here at the 0 point. You first are putting your operation together, writing your procedures, finding your vendors, getting a lot of stuff done. You start producing product, you start building your team, and finally you've got an organization that's running smoothly. You've maybe made a few sales, and you start to exit the embryonic stage and go into a midlife stage. In the midlife stage, once you get into this stage, once you pass this point, you're in for a long haul if you want to sell your company. Because up until this point, in this area, what you have to sell is the dream of what your technology can do. You're selling to that acquirer his image of what he can do with your technology. Once you go beyond that, you're selling an ongoing business, and they're going to be looking at your profits, and you're going to get some multiple of your earnings for the company, and you're going to have to take some time in here to grow those earnings to the point where it becomes attractive to you. So I like this area for sale. This is like probably 4 or 5 years into your business, and you're selling your dream. The first company that I sold the dream. I had a partner. I'm not very clever at financial things. I had a financial partner, and we invested a total of $70,000 in the business, and we sold it a little over 2 years later for just shy of $4 million. That was a quick turnaround. We're out, and we've made our money. In the last business, we thought about selling it around this point, about 5-year point. We were talking to some people about it. We were trying to get around $5 million for it. We didn't sell it. But we then went on another 20 years, or another 15 years, sorry, before the company sold. That's a long haul. So I just want to make you aware of this point, which is critical for turning over your company. Now, once you get out in a mature stage where maybe your technology is becoming aged, becoming obsolete, there are a lot of competitive products out there on the market that are similar to yours, you better be planning on leaving it to your kids at that point. So I'm not too far over my time, and I started 4 minutes late, so okay, I think. This is about the end of nearing the end of my lecture for this evening. And I'm grateful to see so many of you have come back for subsequent lectures. I hope you found these useful. I want to leave you with this thought. Inventing is not a black art. It's something you can do, but it's not something you're born knowing how to do. It's something you have to learn. You have to learn how to get through this torturous, dangerous route. And until you do, your chances of failure are very, very high. So I hope this has been helpful in that sense. Finally, I want to put this up as my next to the last slide and mention to you that I wrote a book about 6 years ago saying most of what I've said to you in these lectures. But the book is horribly out of date, so I don't recommend that you buy it. But I mean, it's useful. A lot of the business things I talked about tonight are still valid in that book, but a lot of the information retrieval aspects of it particularly are out of date. So I would say to keep in mind this website, and when a new edition is out, you'll see it there. I hope it's going to be out this summer. Well, I always finish with this slide, as you know. This is an invention for kicking yourself in the butt if you don't follow your dreams. So that's the end of my lecture series for you.